The silence in the council chamber stretched like a taut wire as the final pieces of classified footage faded from the holographic display. 300 years of carefully buried truth now lay exposed before the assembled representatives, and the weight of that revelation pressed down on every being present. The galaxy had lived with a lie for centuries, and now they faced a crisis that would force them to confront everything they thought they knew about warfare, sacrifice, and survival. Commander Jake Morrison stood slowly from his chair in the human observation section. His movement drew every alien eye in the chamber as he walked toward the central speaking platform. Dr. Lisa Carter watched him with a mixture of pride and terror, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity remained part of galactic civilization or was cast out forever as a dangerous anomaly. The emergency alerts began sounding as Morrison reached the platform. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber as urgent communications arrived from the Outer Rim territories. The Void Swarm had accelerated their advance, consuming 3 more worlds in the past 24 hours. Conventional galactic forces were retreating on all fronts, unable to match an enemy that felt no fear, showed no mercy, and never accepted defeat. Council leader Zephyrian received the updates with visible distress. His 4 arms moved frantically over control surfaces as he processed reports from fleet commanders who were requesting permission to abandon their positions. The swarm's mechanical intelligence had learned to exploit galactic warfare doctrine, using the predictable retreat patterns of organic forces to trap entire fleets in carefully constructed kill zones. The footage from Rin Station Alpha showed the latest defeat in stark detail. Admiral Corlex of the Draconian Fleet had followed standard protocol when his losses exceeded 20%, ordering a tactical withdrawal to preserve his remaining forces. The swarm had anticipated this response and positioned their ships to intercept the retreating vessels, destroying 90% of their fleet before it could reach safe harbor. Captain Betty, Rogers, and her volunteer crew aboard the human freighter Liberty had witnessed the battle from the edge of the system. Their ship was officially a civilian vessel, carrying medical supplies to refugee camps, but Rogers had secretly loaded her cargo holds with military-grade explosives and converted her engines for a single maximum burn that would never be reversed. Transmission from Liberty reached the council chamber just as Morrison prepared to address the assembly. Rogers appeared on the main display, her gray hair disheveled and her uniform torn from emergency repairs to her ship's systems. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically to plot an intercourse course with the massive swarm hive ship that had destroyed Admiral Corlex's fleet. "This is Captain Betty Rogers of the human vessel Liberty. We are beginning our attack run on the primary swarm vessel. Our chances of survival are approximately 0, but intelligence indicates that destroying the hive ship will disrupt swarm coordination in this sector for several days. This should give civilian evacuation efforts time to reach safe harbor." Alien representatives watched in horrified fascination as Rogers continued her transmission. The tactical display showed Liberty's trajectory plotted directly into the heart of the enemy formation. No rational species would attempt such a maneuver because it guaranteed the destruction of their own vessel with only minimal chance of inflicting significant damage on the enemy. Rogers turned to address someone off camera before returning her attention to the transmission. "Tell Earth we held the line. Tell them we did not let the innocent suffer while we had breath in our bodies. Tell them that humans keep their promises, even the ones we make to strangers." The transmission cut to static as Liberty disappeared into the swarm formation. Explosion that followed lit up half the solar system. Rogers had managed to ram her ship directly into the hive vessel's power core, creating a chain reaction that destroyed not only her target, but 6 smaller swarm ships that had been docked. FOR repairs. The remaining enemy vessels drifted without coordination for several hours. allowing civilian transports to escape the system with minimal losses. Morrison waited for the display to clear before addressing the council. His voice carried the weight of a species that had been judged and found too dangerous for civilized warfare, yet whose help was now desperately needed to save that same civilization from extinction. Honored representatives, you have seen the evidence of why my species was banned from galactic warfare. We do not fight the way you fight. We do not retreat when logic demands retreat. We do not abandon the wounded when saving them serves no tactical purpose. We do not follow orders that violate our conscience, and we cannot be controlled through fear of death or promises of reward. The Krillian representative rumbled its approval, remembering the humans who had died to free its people from slavery. But most of the other delegates sat in uncomfortable silence, unwilling to acknowledge their dependence on the very qualities they had once. Condemned. Morrison continued his address with the calm certainty of someone who understood his species' place in the galaxy. The Void Swarm is winning because they have learned to predict your responses. They know you will retreat when losses become unacceptable. They know you will prioritize your own survival over mission objectives. They know you will follow logical, tactical doctrine even when logic leads to defeat. Dr. Lisa Carter joined Morrison at the platform, carrying a datapad that contained the human military's analysis of the swarm threat. Her voice was steady as she presented information that confirmed what every representative already suspected but refused to admit. Our tactical analysis indicates that conventional galactic forces cannot defeat the Void Swarm using current doctrine. The enemy adapts too quickly to logical strategies and exploits every predictable response. Victory requires a level of unpredictability that only human forces can provide. The chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives argued among themselves. The Aquarian delegate pulsed with patterns of extreme agitation while the vegan clicked, its mandibles in distress. They were being asked to embrace the very chaos they had spent centuries trying to eliminate from galactic civilization. Zephyrian called for order as the debate threatened to devolve into the kind of emotional chaos that humans seemed to bring to every situation they touched. His voice carried the authority of his office as he addressed the fundamental question that had brought them all together. The choice before us is simple, but not easy. We can maintain our principles and face extinction at the hands of the Void Swarm, or we can accept human assistance and risk the chaos that humans bring to every conflict they enter. There is no middle ground and no compromise that will satisfy both requirements. Morrison stepped forward one final time to offer humanity's terms. We ask for no special treatment and no permanent changes to galactic law. Lift the ban temporarily and allow human forces to fight alongside yours against the swarm. When the threat is eliminated, we will accept whatever restrictions you choose to place on our military activities. The vote that followed would be remembered as the most difficult decision in galactic history. One by one, the representatives cast their ballots while knowing that either choice carried the potential for disaster. Accepting human help meant embracing unpredictability and chaos. Rejecting it meant facing certain extinction. The final tally was 7 votes in favor of lifting the ban and 5 against. The margin was narrow, but it was enough to change the course of galactic civilization. Humanity would be allowed to fight once more, not because the galaxy trusted them, but because they were the only species crazy enough to fight a war that logic side could not be won. Morrison saluted the assembly with the simple dignity that had marked human military service for generations. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. We always have, we always will. The Void Swarm will learn what every enemy of the innocent eventually discovers. Humans do not know how to quit. As the council session ended and preparations began for humanity's return to galactic warfare, the representatives understood that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. They had chosen survival over certainty, hope over logic, and the unpredictable courage of humans over the safe predictability of defeat. The galaxy was about to remember why some threats require heroes who are too stubborn to accept the impossible, and too compassionate to abandon those who need protection. The Void Swarm had never faced an enemy that grew stronger in defeat and fought hardest when victory seemed furthest away. The ban was lifted, and humanity prepared to do what they had always done best: fight for everyone except themselves. The massive space station floating in the void between galaxies hummed with quiet activity as 12 different alien species gathered for their monthly council meeting. Admiral Zexthara of the Vorthan Empire stood before the circular chamber, his 6 arms gesturing at the holographic display that showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The other council members watched with mild interest as data streams flowed across the row. Translation devices. Earth looked so insignificant. From this distance, just another rock spinning through space with a population that had barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. Zexthara's purple skin rippled with what his species considered amusement as he began his presentation about the humans who called that tiny world home. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a species that had only recently developed faster than light travel, and even that technology was crude by galactic standards. Their ships were slow, bulky things that relied on chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives. Most amusing of all, they still used kinetic weapons, like bullets and missiles, instead of proper energy-based armaments that civilized species had been using for thousands of years. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, completely unaware that his ship was being discussed by beings whose technology surpassed anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The Liberty was humanity's pride, an exploration vessel that had taken 3 years to build and represented the cutting edge of human engineering. To Jake, it felt like the future itself, with its gleaming corridors and advanced computer systems that could calculate jump coordinates in mere seconds. A message that arrived through subspace. Communications changed everything in an instant. Jake stared at the alien symbols scrolling across his screen while the ship's computer worked frantically to translate the transmission. When the translation finally appeared, every human on the bridge felt their blood run cold. The message was simple and direct. The Galactic Council, representing 12 advanced civilizations, had decided that humanity posed a potential threat to galactic peace and stability. Therefore, all human colonies must surrender immediately and submit to protective custody under Council supervision. Humans would be relocated to designated worlds where they could live safely under alien guidance. Any resistance would result in the complete extermination of the human species. The deadline was exactly 72 hours from the moment the message was received. Back on the Council station, War Commander Vic Maul of the Hegemony Military Forces reviewed the battle plans with casual confidence. His species had been conducting military operations for over 2,000 years, and they had never encountered a primitive species that could offer meaningful resistance. The humans had perhaps 200 ships scattered across their small cluster of colonies, while the Council could deploy over 3,000 vessels equipped with energy shields, plasma cannons, and gravitational weapons that could tear apart entire moons. The War Commander's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he calculated the expected duration of the conflict. Based on previous encounters with primitive species, most surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. The few that attempted resistance were usually defeated within hours, sometimes minutes. Vecmaul allocated exactly 6 hours for the complete subjugation of humanity, though he privately suspected it would take far less time. On Earth, President Helen Carter sat in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the Capitol, surrounded by military advisors and government officials whose faces reflected the gravity of their situation. The room buzzed with nervous energy as reports flowed in from across human space. Every colony had received the same ultimatum, and panic was beginning to spread through civilian populations who had never imagined that hostile aliens even existed. Fleet Admiral Nick Roberts stood beside a tactical display showing the positions of every human ship in known space. His weathered face remained calm despite the impossible odds they faced. Roberts had spent 40 years in the Space Navy, working his way up from a junior officer on cargo freighters to the highest military position in human space. He had seen humanity grow from a single-world species to a modest interstellar civilization, and he was not about to watch it all disappear without a fight. General Lisa Brooks reviewed the defensive capabilities of Earth's orbital platforms and planetary shield generators. The technology was impressive by human standards, but she knew it would seem laughably primitive to species that had been building such systems for millennia. Still, her duty was to protect humanity, and she would use every weapon and defensive system at their disposal. The aliens had made one crucial error in their intelligence gathering, though none of the humans realized it yet. The Council scouts had observed human military exercises and technological capabilities, but they had never witnessed humans fighting for their survival. Every previous conflict in human history had been between different human factions, civilized wars with rules and limitations and concern for civilian casualties. What the aliens could not understand from their distant observations was that humans possessed something no other species in the galaxy had ever developed. When faced with extinction, humans did not simply fight harder or with greater courage. They became something entirely different, something that followed no rules and recognized no limitations when the survival of their species was at stake. The council members finished their meeting with the casual confidence of beings who had solved countless similar problems over the centuries. They had determined that humans were too primitive to pose any real threat, too scattered to mount coordinated resistance, and too weak to damage even a single council vessel. The operation would proceed as scheduled, with minimal forces allocated to what they considered a minor policing action. War Commander Vec Maul dispatched his fleet toward human space with orders to accept surrender or eliminate all resistance with overwhelming force. The alien ships moved in perfect formation, their crews confident in their technological superiority and certain that this would be just another routine operation against a backward species that had forgotten its place in the galactic order. As the alien fleet jumped into hyperspace and began their journey toward Earth, President Carter gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. Rather than surrender or attempt to negotiate, humanity would fight back with everything they had, using tactics and strategies that no civilized species had ever conceived or encountered. The Council had made their calculations based on technology and numbers, but they had failed to account for the one factor that would determine the outcome of the coming battle. They had never encountered a species that viewed warfare not as a civilized contest between honorable opponents, but as a desperate struggle where the only rule was survival and the only acceptable outcome was total victory or total extinction. Fleet Admiral Nick Roberts stood in the secure briefing room, 3 levels below Earth's primary military command center, surrounded by the best tactical minds humanity had to offer. Captain Amy Nelson sat at the holographic display table, her fingers dancing across the controls as she brought up detailed scans of the approaching alien fleet. The data they had gathered from long-range sensors painted a terrifying picture of technological superiority that should have sent any reasonable military commander into immediate surrender negotiations. Colonel Ben Wright leaned forward in his chair, studying the alien ship configurations with the intensity of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for battles that everyone hoped would never come. His expertise in asymmetric warfare had earned him respect throughout the military, But nothing in his training had prepared him for an enemy this advanced. The alien vessels moved in perfect geometric formations, their hulls gleaming with energy fields that could deflect any conventional weapon in the human arsenal. Dr. Ruth Clark adjusted her glasses as she scrolled through terabytes of data her analysis team had compiled about alien technology and battle tactics. As the military's chief tactical analyst, she had built her reputation on finding weaknesses in seemingly impossible situations. Her computer models ran constantly in the background, processing every scrap of information they had about the Council fleet and searching for any possible advantage humanity might exploit. The alien ships were massive constructs that dwarfed even the largest human vessels, each one capable of carrying thousands of crew members and equipped with weapons that could crack open moons. Their energy shields flickered with power levels that exceeded the entire electrical output of most human colonies. Every tactical simulation the computers ran ended with the complete destruction of human forces within the first few minutes of engagement. Captain Nelson pulled up a comparative analysis that made everyone in the room fall silent. The smallest alien destroyer carried more firepower than humanity's largest battleship, while their capital ships possessed enough destructive capability to sterilize entire planets from orbit. The Council fleet advancing toward Earth represented more military power than humans had ever imagined possible. Yet they were treating this as a minor police action that required only a fraction of their total forces. Admiral Roberts walked slowly around the holographic display, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the enemy formation. He had fought in the colonial wars 20 years earlier, when human factions battled each other for control of mining rights in the outer planets. Those conflicts had been brutal affairs, where victory often went to whichever side was willing to break more rules and use more desperate tactics. The aliens approaching Earth clearly expected a civilized engagement between honorable opponents who would follow established military protocols. Dr. Clark highlighted a section of her analysis that caught everyone's attention. The alien weapons were incredibly advanced plasma cannons and gravitational disruptors that could tear apart conventional armor like paper. But they were designed specifically to counter energy-based defenses and other plasma weapons. Every major galactic civilization apparently used similar technology, so the Council ships were optimized to fight enemies that would meet them with equivalent energy-based systems. Colonel Wright stood up and pointed at the tactical display showing human weapon systems. Every military expert in the galaxy would look at humanity's kinetic weapons and nuclear warheads as primitive relics from a barbaric past. Civilized species had abandoned such crude armaments thousands of years ago in favor of clean, efficient energy weapons that could be precisely controlled and targeted. The idea of using physical projectiles and explosive devices was apparently so backward that no galactic military had bothered to design defenses against such weapons. Captain Nelson ran a series of calculations through the tactical computer, feeding in data about alien shield frequencies and energy patterns. The results were fascinating in a way that made her pulse quicken with dangerous hope. The Council ship's defensive systems were incredibly sophisticated when dealing with energy attacks, but they showed curious gaps when it came to high-velocity physical objects. Their shields could deflect plasma bolts that would vaporize a human ship, but they seemed less effective against solid projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. Lieutenant Commander Steve Murphy entered the briefing room carrying a tablet filled with technical specifications that his engineering teams had been working on for the past 18 hours. As head of weapons development, he had been tasked with finding ways to maximize the effectiveness of humanity's primitive arsenal against an enemy that outclassed them in every measurable category. His solution was elegantly simple in the way that only desperate innovation could achieve. The human military had always relied on kinetic weapons because they were cheap, reliable, and devastatingly effective against other human targets. Nuclear. Warheads remained in the arsenal because they provided massive destructive power in a compact package that could be delivered by relatively simple missile systems. What Murphy's teams had realized was that these weapons could be modified and enhanced using the same advanced targeting and guidance systems that powered human space exploration. Murphy explained his plan to upgrade every kinetic weapon in the human arsenal with sophisticated electronic warfare packages and advanced maneuvering thrusters. The aliens would expect primitive missiles that flew in straight lines and could be easily intercepted by point defense systems. Instead, they would face weapons that could change course unpredictably, jam enemy sensors, and coordinate their attacks in ways that no civilized military had ever encountered. Dr. Clark added her own tactical innovation to the growing battle plan. Human ships were smaller and more maneuverable than the massive alien vessels, and human pilots had been trained to think independently rather than follow rigid formation protocols. While the Council fleet moved in perfect geometric patterns that maximized their defensive coverage, human forces could operate as individual units that struck without warning and disappeared before the enemy could respond. Admiral Roberts listened to each presentation with growing confidence that slowly replaced the despair he had felt when the alien ultimatum first arrived. The Council had made their calculations based on technology levels and ship counts, but they had never fought an enemy that approached warfare from a completely different philosophical perspective. Every galactic civilization apparently followed similar rules of engagement that emphasized honor, minimal casualties, and surgical precision in military operations. Humans had developed their military doctrine through thousands of years of warfare against other humans, where survival was the only consideration, and victory belonged to whoever was willing to be more ruthless than their opponent. The concept of civilized warfare was a luxury that species adopted only after they had eliminated all existential threats to their survival. Humanity had never reached that point, and now their primitive savagery might be the only thing standing between them and extinction. The meeting ended with orders being transmitted to every human ship and military installation throughout known space. They had less than 48 hours to implement a battle plan that relied entirely on the enemy's complete misunderstanding of human nature and military philosophy. War Commander Thekmal stood on the bridge of his flagship as the massive Council fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. The sight that greeted him filled his 4 eyes with satisfaction as 3,000 alien warships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation, their hulls gleaming with the soft blue glow of active energy shields. Each vessel represented centuries of military engineering and combat experience. While their crews had trained for decades in the established protocols of galactic warfare, the human solar system looked pathetically vulnerable from this distance. With only a handful of primitive space stations orbiting the inner planets and a small collection of ships scattered throughout the asteroid belt. Long-range sensors detected maybe 200 human vessels in total, most of them converted cargo haulers and exploration ships that had been hastily fitted with weapons that belonged in a museum of ancient military history. Thekmal's tactical computers ran their final calculations and confirmed what every council member already knew. The upcoming engagement would last no more than a few minutes, just long enough for the humans to realize the futility of resistance and surrender before their entire civilization was wiped from existence. The war commander felt almost guilty about bringing such overwhelming force against such a primitive enemy, but council protocol demanded decisive action when dealing with potential threats to galactic stability. The alien fleet moved deeper into the solar system with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Their formations were textbook perfect, with heavy battleships at the center, surrounded by layers of cruisers and destroyers that could intercept any attack while providing overlapping fields of defensive fire. Every ship maintained precise spacing and communication protocols that had been refined through thousands of years of military tradition. Captain Amy Nelson watched the alien advance from the bridge of the UEC Defiance, her hands steady on the yaoyus. Tactical controls despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. The enemy fleet was so large that her sensors could barely track all the individual ships, each one radiating enough power to destroy her vessel with a single shot. Yet something about their approach struck her as oddly predictable, almost mechanical in its precision and adherence to what appeared to be standard military doctrine. The aliens moved like they were participating in a parade, rather than approaching a battle, their ships maintaining perfect geometric formations that would have impressed any military academy instructor. Nelson had studied historical battles throughout her career, and she recognized the signs of an enemy that had grown comfortable with overwhelming technological superiority. They expected their opponents to behave according to established rules of engagement, meeting them in honorable combat between equivalent forces. Dr. Ruth Clark monitored the approaching fleet from her position in the tactical command center, her computers analyzing every aspect of the alien formation and movement patterns. What she discovered confirmed her earlier theories about galactic military doctrine. The Council ships were positioned to maximize their defensive capabilities against energy weapons and plasma attacks, with their shields configured to deflect the types of armaments that civilized species had been using for millennia. More importantly, the alien fleet was moving in predictable patterns that suggested they expected humans to meet them in conventional battle formation. Their tactical deployment assumed that human ships would advance in organized groups, trading volleys of energy fire while maneuvering for positional advantage according to established military principles. The possibility that humans might approach warfare from a completely different philosophical perspective had apparently never occurred to them. Vecmal issued orders for his fleet to assume standard battle positions as they reached the outer planets of the human solar system. The massive alien vessels spread out in a formation that had been used successfully in hundreds of previous campaigns against primitive species. Energy weapons powered up to full charge, while targeting systems locked onto the scattered human ships that seemed to be fleeing in panic toward the inner system. The war commander opened communication channels to broadcast humanity's final warning, confident that the sight of his overwhelming fleet would convince even the most stubborn human commanders to surrender rather than face annihilation. His translation computers worked to convert his words into the crude human languages as he prepared to offer them one last chance to submit peacefully to Council authority. Captain Nelson received the alien transmission and listened to the mechanical voice that promised swift death to any human who continued to resist. The message was delivered with the casual arrogance of a species that had never encountered meaningful opposition, treating humanity like rebellious children who needed to be taught their proper place in the galactic order. What the aliens could not know was that their condescending tone only strengthened human resolve to fight back with everything they had. Throughout human space, modified missiles and kinetic weapons moved silently through the void on trajectories that had been calculated hours earlier by the best tactical minds humanity could produce. The projectiles ran with minimal electronic signatures and no active guidance systems, appearing on alien sensors as nothing more than space debris or natural objects drifting through the solar system. Lieutenant Commander Steve Murphy's weapons modifications had worked perfectly, creating an invisible network of death that surrounded the approaching Council fleet. Dr. Clark's analysis revealed the final piece of intelligence that would determine the outcome of the coming battle. The alien ships were scanning for threats using detection systems designed to identify energy weapons, plasma cannons, and other advanced military technology. Their sensors were incredibly sophisticated when it came to finding such weapons, but they were essentially blind to primitive kinetic projectiles and nuclear warheads that generated no active energy signatures. The Council fleet continued its advance toward Earth with perfect formation discipline and absolute confidence in their inevitable victory. Thekmal checked his chronometer and noted that they were ahead of schedule, which would allow him to complete the subjugation of humanity and return to Council space in time for the next quarterly military review. He had already begun composing his after-action report, describing how another primitive species had been brought under proper galactic supervision. What none of the aliens realized was that they were flying directly into the most carefully prepared ambush in human military history. Every aspect of their approach had been anticipated and planned for by human strategists who understood that their only chance for survival lay in fighting a type of battle that no civilized species had ever experienced. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the Council's assumptions about warfare and establish humanity as a force that could not be ignored or dismissed by anyone in the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Nick Roberts stood in the command center, watching the tactical display as the alien fleet moved deeper into the solar system with the same predictable formations they had maintained since entering human space. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the holographic table as he waited for the perfect moment to spring the trap that humanity had spent the last 48 hours preparing. A countdown timer showed less than 3 minutes until the Council ships would reach the predetermined engagement zone where human weapons could achieve maximum effectiveness. The alien fleet looked unstoppable as it advanced through space with shields blazing and weapons powered to full charge. War Commander Thekmal had positioned his ships exactly as human strategists had predicted, with the largest vessels at the center, surrounded by protective screens of smaller craft that could intercept incoming attacks. The formation was textbook perfect, according to galactic military doctrine, designed to maximize defensive coverage while maintaining overwhelming firepower superiority. Admiral Roberts spoke quietly into his communication headset, sending coded signals to human forces scattered throughout the solar system. Captain Amy Nelson received her orders aboard the UES Defiance and immediately began powering up her ship's modified weapon systems. The kinetic railguns had been upgraded with targeting computers that could track multiple enemies simultaneously, while her missile batteries carried nuclear warheads that had been enhanced with electronic warfare packages designed to confuse. Alien Point Defense Systems. Dr. Ruth Clark monitored the approaching fleet from her position in the Tactical Analysis Center, her computers tracking every alien ship and calculating optimal targeting solutions for the weapons that were already moving silently through space around them. The modified missiles and kinetic projectiles that Lieutenant Commander Steve Murphy's teams had deployed were invisible to alien sensors, appearing as nothing more than space debris until they received activation signals from human command centers. Moment arrived with mechanical precision as Admiral Roberts gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. Human weapons systems throughout the solar system activated simultaneously, launching the most coordinated attack that humanity had ever attempted. Railguns fired tungsten projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, while nuclear missiles ignited their engines and began accelerating toward predetermined targets with guidance systems that could adjust their courses to compensate for enemy defensive maneuvers. War Commander Thekmal noticed the first energy signatures appearing on his sensors and felt a moment of mild curiosity rather than concern. The primitive human weapons seemed laughably inadequate compared to the sophisticated plasma cannons and gravitational disruptors that his fleet carried. His tactical computers identified the incoming projectiles as simple kinetic rounds and nuclear devices, the same crude armaments that civilized species had abandoned thousands of years earlier in favor of more elegant energy-based weapons. The war commander ordered his ships to activate standard defensive protocols, confident that their energy shields would deflect the primitive human attacks with ease. Alien point defense systems came online and began targeting the incoming missiles with precision laser arrays that could vaporize conventional warheads before they reached effective range. Everything proceeded according to established military doctrine until the first tungsten projectile struck an alien destroyer at nearly 20% of light speed. The kinetic impact punched through the enemy. Ship's energy shields, like they were made of paper, creating a hole that extended from the forward hull to the rear engine compartments. The alien vessel's sophisticated defensive systems had been designed to deflect plasma bolts and energy beams, but they were completely ineffective against solid projectiles moving at relativistic velocities. The destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash of light that illuminated the shocked faces of alien crew members throughout the fleet. Captain Nelson watched through her tactical display as the first wave of human attacks struck the alien formation with devastating effect. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully calculated patterns that created cascading failures in enemy shield systems, while kinetic projectiles punched through hulls that had been considered impenetrable by every military expert in the galaxy. The aliens had never encountered weapons that could bypass their defensive technology so completely, and their perfect formations began to break apart as ships tried desperately to evade attacks they could barely detect. Colonel Ben Wright's tactical deception succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, as human ships that appeared to be retreating in panic suddenly reversed course and launched close-range attacks against confused alien vessels. The Council fleet had been trained to expect honorable combat between organized formations, not the chaotic swarm tactics the human pilots employed with deadly effectiveness. Small human fighters darted between massive alien battleships like angry insects, striking at vulnerable points and disappearing before enemy weapons could track their movements. Dr. Clark's computers registered kill after kill as alien ships succumbed to weapons they had never imagined facing in actual combat. The sophisticated alien vessels were masterpieces of engineering when fighting against equivalent technology, but they were helpless against the primitive savagery of human warfare. Nuclear explosions lit up the void between planets, while kinetic projectiles continued their deadly work, turning the pride of the Galactic Council into expanding clouds of radioactive debris. Thekmal stared at his tactical displays in growing horror as over half his fleet disappeared in the space of 7 minutes. The humans were fighting with a ferocity and unpredictability that violated every principle of civilized warfare, using weapons and tactics that no honorable species would ever consider employing. His crew reported that human pilots were deliberately ramming damaged alien ships rather than allowing them to surrender, while others used nuclear devices as close-range weapons that destroyed both attacker and target in massive explosions. War Commander realized with sickening clarity that his fleet was not engaged in a military operation against a primitive species, but rather trapped in a slaughter orchestrated by beings who viewed warfare as a desperate struggle for survival, rather than a civilized contest between honorable opponents. The humans had no interest in minimizing casualties or following established rules of engagement, and their primitive weapons were proving devastatingly effective against technology that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. Admiral Roberts watched the alien fleet disintegrate under the coordinated human assault and felt a grim satisfaction that their desperate gamble had succeeded. The Council had expected to face a weak enemy that would surrender quickly when confronted with overwhelming technological superiority, but instead they had encountered something far more dangerous than any advanced weapon system. They had met humanity fighting for its survival, and that made all the difference in determining who would emerge victorious from the 7-minute war that was reshaping the balance of power throughout the galaxy.